When I was reading your book, it was fascinating all the way through. There were certain moments that particularly piqued my interest, and particularly when you touched on BPD, borderline personality disorder. Would you like to go and talk about that little bit more?
Yeah, so borderline personality disorder, there is this idealization and devaluation. That's one major component of it. And I'm familiar with BPD because I had a couple close friends who had BPD, and I have a very, very close family member who has BPD. And there are funny stories to tell about her that maybe I'll leave for another time. They're funny now in retrospect. At the time, they were not very funny.
Diana, just for anyone who doesn't know at all what borderline personality disorder is, just start from the very
from the very beginning. So borderline personality disorder is called borderline personality disorder actually because it was unclear if it was a personality disorder or a more significant disorder, right? They were unclear about where it actually fell. So it's not at all like dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities. It's actually a disorder where you have very volatile relationships. These people often have problems with drugs and alcohol. They have problems keeping any kind of romantic relationship. And they also vacillate very quickly between idealizing and devaluing their partners.
This is someone who looks up to you like you're God 1 minute and then just thinks you're the worst person in the world the next day.
Yes.
And why was to wonder why those people struggle to keep relationships.
Yeah, so a big part of it is volatility.
Yeah.
But if you define borderline personality disorder, some people would argue with me and say it's not more common in women than men. I think it's much more common in women than men. If you want to say that men have an equal rate of it, you have to define it, I think, quite differently. So I'll just talk about women's borderline personality disorder. But I think all women have a touch of this, and I think it's kind of like hyper training. So you can be incredibly reinforcing to somebody 1 minute. These women escalate romantic involvement often very, very quickly. And like I dated a woman who had borderline personality disorder, and there was just so many amazing things about her. Like she knew everything about me. She had so many pictures of me in her room. We were at university together. The people knew who I was, kept pictures of me. She knew all my preferences, all my favorite things. If I told her a story once, she would remember it forever, right? She had an amazing social memory. But I took her to a party once, right? It was like a Halloween party around this time of year, many years ago. And she was just wearing like a coat and lingerie. And I literally talked to somebody else for 5 minutes. And she left and started walking down a not dangerous part of Texas, but a dark part of Texas in the middle of the night in just lingerie and a coat in order to punish me, basically, for talking to somebody else, for diverting my attention for 5 minutes. And women who have borderline personality disorder also more likely to do what's called parasuicide, to say that they are going to attempt suicide or threaten to attempt suicide. So what I talk about in the book is basically that this is like training in overdrive, right? It's these women they're really good at remembering your preferences. They know what's uniquely reinforcing to you. Sex is something that's uniquely reinforcing to men. They know how to use that. They know how to use their attractiveness. They're incredibly compelling in many ways, but they can also be incredibly punitive. And the family member that I have is amazing at figuring out where the jugular is of somebody. What is like the worst thing that you could say to somebody that they're going to be thinking about for months or years? And this is something else that they're really, really good at. And it's a kind of a superpower, but in the sense that, in X-Men or any of these other movies, you see some people who have superpowers use them for good and some people use them for evil. I do think that women have this ability, and if you know about what you're trying to do with it, you can use it to really strengthen and improve your relationships rather than make somebody else miserable and control them completely.
But it sounds as if there's traits of narcissism there as well. That there's similarities between the two, or have I got that completely wrong?
That is a no. I've learned to read it.
Narcissism, there's often commonality with narcissism. I think narcissism gets defined so broadly now that I actually don't know. There's all these videos on YouTube and things about like how to deal with a narcissist. And narcissist is kind of just code now, psychology code for like
asshole.
Shitty person. Shitty person. So narcissism, there is some degree of it. And then there's this thing called fragile narcissism, which even expands the definition further, where you're like, okay, well, somebody who thinks really highly of themselves, but sometimes also doesn't think highly of themselves, that's kind of everybody. So there is an aspect of it there in that they think that they're so important that somebody else should give over all their attention and energy and resources to them. So I would say that is actually accurate, yeah.
And one thing I wanted to deal with before we wrap up the interview, you talked about the differences between men and women in some of these areas, and manipulating other people, or that's a negative word, but influencing other people, let's say. One of the experiments you talk about is that a 4-year study, I think, of couples found that if the woman was less forgiving at the end of that 4-year period, the man was essentially better trained, let's say. But it wasn't replicated on the other side. If the man was less forgiving and used punishment and whatever, the woman didn't tend to change.
Yeah.
So what is that all about? And maybe, since the book is gendered towards women, what are some tips for men for how to behave with their romantic partner if she is female?
Okay. So forgiveness is just the suspension of punishment. So anger, forgiveness is just when you stop being angry. Yeah. And it's a form of reinforcement in that, in the same way as if I was just hitting you over the head. I don't know why I keep looking at you, Francis. It's just hitting you over the head, and then I stopped, it would be reinforcing, even though me not hitting you overhead right now is not reinforcing.
I know why you keep looking at him, because out of the two of us, in your mind, he's the only potential available romantic partner. Because you think I'm gay for some reason, Diana.
So we'll go back to this. I thought that when in the last interview I kept saying, like, well, you don't have to worry about this Constantine.
Yeah, I was like, well, what?
And I remember at the time I was like, a gay Jewish Russian. Can you tell me about how you sought asylum here? You poor thing.
And you see, this is the way of going for the jugular. And I was thinking for like a month after that, what are the vibes that I'm sending off here?
Well, you said my partner Francis, and then I met Francis. You guys really
never do that again.
You guys should do something for the female gaze right now. But anyway, yes, I did totally think Constantine was gay.
So
and then
the
partner thing is super weird. So hitting somebody over the head, forgiveness.
Yes.
So in this long-term study, they found that a woman whose forgiveness increased over time had a partner whose conscientiousness increased over time. That's a very, very fancy way of saying that essentially women were using punishment to change their partner's personalities, and conscientiousness is a major personality characteristic that you would want in a husband. Conscientiousness means that he's going to do things that he said he was going to do, he's going to feel bad when he didn't do the things that he said he was going to do, and he's also going to be attentive to your needs. Those are all conscientiousness things. And so even though it's unclear how much environment can change personality, it is interesting that there's actually not more studies about how much wives and husbands can change one another's personalities. So in this study, they actually found that women were changing men's personalities, their husbands' personalities, more than vice versa, and that men's forgiveness had no influence on women's conscientiousness. Now, this could be a novel, modern thing. It could be that men had more control over their wives in the past, and that dynamic has flipped. Or it could be that women are using these more sophisticated methods in order to change personality, and that the method that a man would have had at his disposal, which is threats, has become morally frowned upon, right? To put it lightly, and so that could be it. I'm not really sure why, but it does seem that women are better at this particular skill, in my view, than men are.